I never expected a black waitress to challenge the rude billionaire who terrified us all. I will never forget the day everything fell apart. She stood there, slightly trembling, but with fire in her eyes. The restaurant was buzzing, plates clinking, voices rising, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. It was the usual chaos, but something felt off today. That unsettling vibe settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. There he was, Marcus Tallman. A giant among men, wearing arrogance as his armor. His tailored suit had a sheen that practically screamed power. And his voice? Oh, that was a different beast. It sliced through the air, dripping with disdain. We all hated him, but feared him more. He eyed the room from his corner table, a predator assessing his prey. I could see whispers ripple through the crowd, nervous glances exchanged like handshakes. Silent prayers echoed for anyone brave enough to challenge him. Just then, Ava, my coworker, stepped into the line of fire. Tall and proud, she was much more than just a waitress. She'd held her head high every day, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, to support her daughter. We depended on tips to survive. She had lives at stake. Her hands shook as she delivered a drink to Tallman, but she didn't back down. "Excuse me, sir," she said, tone steady yet fierce, "your drink isn't what you ordered." A hush fell over the room. What was she doing? The tension was palpable. All eyes were on them. I could feel the air grow thick, like a storm brewing, waiting for the first lightning strike. Customers leaned in, eager for the explosive showdown. Would Ava, our brave warrior, finally stand triumphant against the monster? Tallman leaned back, a smirk curling his lips. "I see," he responded, voice smooth like silk but laced with venom. "Perhaps you don't know your place, darling." Gasps. I felt my blood run cold. My palms were clammy. A ripple of forced laughter erupted from his table, echoing through my core. I wanted to scream, to pull her away, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Ava's eyes narrowed, steeling herself against the volatility rippling through the room. "And perhaps you don't know respect," she shot back, defiance radiating off her. My chest tightened. I admired her courage, but it felt like watching a mouse confront a lion. The boldness sent shivers down my spine, hearts racing around the room in anticipation. The silence was deafening, stretching with every heartbeat. What would happen next? Would she break? Or would something extraordinary unfold right before us? I held my breath, caught in her resolve, praying she wouldn't fall. And then came a voice from behind me. "Someone needs to teach him a lesson." It was Joseph, an elderly gentleman who'd been coming to the diner for years. But as his words hung in the air, I couldn't shake the feeling that none of us understood the depth of this moment. Just when I thought the tension couldn't rise any higher, the door swung open. A gust of wind rushed in, signaling an even darker storm brewing outside. Ava glanced over her shoulder, momentarily distracted. Was it the end of her fight? Or the beginning of something bigger? I couldn't take my eyes off them. My heart raced, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. As Ava stood her ground against Marcus Tallman, the world around us seemed to blur, a simple diner transforming into a battlefield soaked in tension. My stomach tightened, bracing for what could be the fallout of their confrontation. Time felt stretched and elastic, moments slipping away like water through my fingers. I could see fear mingling with pride in Ava's eyes, a juxtaposition that mirrored the emotions swirling through the rest of us. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows a reminder that the storm wasn't just brewing within the diner but was also loitering right at our doorstep. The chatter that had filled the restaurant melted away, replaced by a thick silence that begged for resolution. I took a step closer, instinct pulling me toward Ava, as if I could shield her from the impending blow. Marcus, unfazed, leaned forward. A lesson? Is that what you're advocating for, old man? He sneered, his gaze shifting to Joseph, the fragile figure whose words hung in the air. Believe me, I'm only too familiar with the class of people who think they can raise a finger at me. An undercurrent of tension coursed through the crowd as murmurs began to arise. Not everyone was weak. Not everyone cowered. Some heads nodded in quiet solidarity, emboldened by Ava's initial stand against the unwarranted disdain. Just as I felt a flicker of hope ignite among us, a wave of dread washed over me. Ava needed backup, and desperately. People gazed around, searching for strength in each other, but it felt like all eyes were glued to the antagonism unfolding. What if nobody intervened? What if even one small act of kindness wasn't enough to sway the scales? I took a deep breath. Ava, you have this, my mind urged her silently. But in that systemic silence, something unbelievable happened. A small, timid voice broke through. Leave her alone. A child, no older than 7, stood at the edge of the restaurant, clutching a stuffed bear, eyes wide and fierce. She pointed a finger directly at Marcus, her brows furrowed in defiance. The little girl's words hung in the air like a fresh breeze on a sweltering day, catching us all off guard. The diner collectively held its breath, and for a moment, even Marcus seemed startled, his face a curious mix of amusement and contempt. "Oh, darling," he mocked, his voice dripping with condescension, "and who might you be?" The child stepped closer, determination etched on her small features. "I am someone who knows how to be nice, and you should be nice too." Her innocence and conviction struck a chord, stirring the room towards unexpected camaraderie. For the first time, I felt a shift in the tide. But it was a small wave against a monstrous storm. Marcus's laughter echoed through the diner, cold and unfeeling as it sliced through the moment. Nice? This world isn't about nice, sweetheart. It's about power, he chuckled, his disdain heavier than the storm clouds rolling in outside. And I have plenty of it. In that moment, something shifted within the restaurant, as if a shared understanding sparked among us. People began to murmur soft words of encouragement, the atmosphere thickened with collective hope. I felt a rush of emotion, viewing fellow patrons as potential allies against the Goliath that Marcus represented. Swan-like, Ava stood tall, reflecting that hope, but then, a voice from the back yelled, "You're wrong. It's not just about power. What about love?" An older woman, her hands trembling but voice steady, had joined the fray, lifting the spirits of those around her. "We don't always need to back down. We can choose kindness." The flames of defiance surged brighter. As whispers rose into shouts of encouragement, I felt a flicker of hope battling against my earlier despair. Maybe we could come together as a community, show Marcus the power of unity, embrace Ava's fight in ways far beyond simply standing around. Yet, just as the tide of emotions began to swell in our favor, the door swung open again, but this time it wasn't the wind stinging our skin that drew our attention. A sinister figure in an inconspicuous hat stepped inside, eyes scanning the room like a hawk hunting for its prey. My heart sank as I recognized him, a known associate of Marcus Tallman, notorious for his intimidating presence and loyalty to the billionaire's empire. In that instant, a new wave of uncertainty washed over me. The weight of our fragile unity teetered as the figure's presence set a dreadful tone. Everything we had built, every ounce of courage and kindness now felt perilously suspended on the knife's edge of impending chaos. The showdown was just beginning, and no one knew how dark the shadows could grow. The tension in the diner shifted from a simmering pot of defiance to a barely contained explosion. The man in the hat, tall and broad-shouldered, glided toward Marcus, his movements calm yet menacing. Conversation sputtered out as fear rippled through the crowd. The defiant chatter that had surged moments ago became mere whispers, quivering at the edges of uncertainty. "Looks like the circus is in town," the figure said dryly, a smile crawling across his face that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you're all enjoying the show." Marcus straightened, his expression morphing from surprise to calculating. "What are you doing here, James?" he demanded, the faux confidence cracking slightly. "This isn't your circus." James chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that echoed through the diner. "Isn't it? You see, Marcus, you can try to play the hero in front of these people, but we both know the truth. They don't stand a chance against me." He flicked his gaze over the patrons, a smirk curving on his lips that felt like a challenge. Ava, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, took a small, courageous step forward. "You don't know us. You don't know what we're capable of," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremors of fear passing through her. James turned, his expression a mixture of surprise and disdain. "Oh, isn't that adorable? The little girl wants to play fighter. How admirable." He leaned closer, his tone dripping with mockery. "But I assure you, sweetheart, this isn't a game you can win." From my spot at the counter, I felt a burning urge to shout out, to urge the patrons to rally around Ava once more, but my throat dried up. Would they rise again? Would they stand with her in the face of such brazen intimidation, or would we crumble under the weight of fear? Then, like a beam of light cutting through clouds, an elderly man rose from the back, his frail frame cloaked in courage. "You underestimate us, mister," he said, voice shaking but resolute. "We've seen darkness before more than you can imagine. All your intimidation is just hot air." A ripple of agreement sparked among the tables, the sound of chairs scraping as hesitant individuals began to rise, emboldened by the old man's words. Encouragement rolled through the crowd, and I could feel it. It was palpable, a collective resolve brewing anew despite the growing shadows. Jameis' laughter filled the diner again, but it held less power now. "Is that really all you've got? A bunch of fearful old men and a child clinging to her teddy bear?" He rolled his eyes, the disdain tangible. But the spirit in the room shifted again, stoked by a warmth that could only be described as familial. A middle-aged woman gathered her apron tighter, standing beside Ava. "There's power in love and community, something you clearly don't understand," she said, her voice unwavering. "We won't back down." Suddenly, the air was electric. The spirit of unity swelled, and people began finding their voices, their resolve amplified tenfold. "You're nothing without your money." Someone shouted, and more echoed, each voice strengthening the pulse of hope. However, in the midst of our crescendo of defiance, Jameis' expression darkened. "You think you're brave? How about I show you what true power looks like?" He pulled a small device from his pocket, pointing it toward the door. My heart raced, dread pooling in my stomach. "Don't do it!" I shouted, taking a step forward, but it felt too little, too late. The moment he pressed the button, a deep, rumbling noise filled the diner, reverberating through the very walls. It was a simple warning, yet its implications were terrifying. Almost mechanically, the lights flickered and died, shrouding us in an ominous gloom. My heart raced as shadows elongated across the floor, swallowing light, swallowing courage. Panic flared. Then, just as darkness fell, the unmistakable sound of sirens wailed across the night, bright beams of light piercing through the diner windows. But with it came another realization: those lights were not coming to save us. They had come to enforce Marcus' dominance, to quell our uprising. Confusion settled as my heart sank. "Don't let this end us," Ava shouted, taking my hand in a vice grip. I could feel her fear radiating through our clasp, but beneath it slumbered a fierce determination. It coursed through her veins, but with every uncertainty that loomed closer, a part of me shattered at the thought that our community could crumble again, fed by fear, that we could lose the very flicker of hope that had ignited moments ago. As the police entered, weary yet honed like a blade ready to cut down any dissension, I realized we were at a precipice. Our fight was only beginning, but the stakes had never been higher. The bridge to our future hung dangerously over a chasm that widened with each heartbeat. The question now wasn't just whether we could stand united, it was whether we could fight together against the darkness threatening to engulf us. In this chaos, amid the confusion, I caught a glimmer, a piece of hope shining through the storm. We had come so far, yet the next move held the power to break us or make us whole. And just as my thoughts spun, I caught Ava's glance seeking mine amidst the chaos. Her eyes whispered one question: could we really fight the shadows and win? The answer was buried somewhere deep as I prepared to face the unknown, unsure of what awaited us or who among us would rise for the battle ahead. As the police officers filed in, a thick tension spread through the diner. Their uniforms gleamed under the flickering emergency lights, casting long shadows of authority over the room. The atmosphere became a fragile tightrope, teetering between desperation and determination. I felt a shoving urgency pulsate within, like a drumbeat urging us to act, but fear gnawed at our sense of solidarity. Ava's grip on my hand tightened as she kept her gaze locked upon the officers. "We have to show them that we won't back down," she whispered fiercely. That small flicker of rebellion ignited something within me, urging me to stand firm even as my heart hammered relentlessly against my rib cage. James, wherever he stood, seemed to relish our turmoil. His eyes gleamed with unsettling satisfaction, reveling in the chaos he had created. "Officers," he called out, his voice smooth and condescending like honey laced with venom. "Thank you for joining us. I'm merely reminding these citizens," he said, sarcasm twisting the word on his tongue, to remain in their place. That I could see the officers exchanging looks, a few choosing to glare at James with barely concealed suspicion. There was a flicker of doubt in their eyes, but the overwhelming aura of authority reigned. It threatened to crush the flicker of courage that had ignited. "Sir," one of the officers finally spoke, stepping toward James. "We received reports of disturbances in this area. Can you identify the instigator?" James' smirk widened, as though relishing an opportunity to display his power. "Why, of course. Look no further than these ungrateful patrons. They've chosen to protest against my generosity. It's the least I could do to offer them a taste of reality." The word felt like a slap across the face. I wanted to scream, to tell the officer that this man wasn't their ally, he was our tormentor. But another voice deep inside echoed back, reminding me of the risk. The odds were stacked high against us, and a moment of miscalculation could unleash a storm far more violent than the one already brewing. Ava, sensing my turmoil, leaned closer. "We can't let them do this," she urged, the steel in her resolve sharpening the edges of her voice. "They might be scared, but they have power too. We can show them that we want cowards." As she spoke, I glanced around, observing the faces of the patrons, most of whom wore a mix of fear and determination. The elderly man who had bravely spoken moments before now cradled his hands together, searching for courage even as worry etched deeper wrinkles on his brow. The waitress who stood beside him with that gentle but fierce demeanor wiped the tears pooling in her eyes. I felt a wave of solidarity ripple through the crowd. "Let's do this," I whispered back to Ava, who nodded, her face alight with fervor. At this moment, the unexpected warmth of kinship flooded through me. Before I knew it, people began to rise. The elderly man took another step forward, voice steady despite the quivering notes. "We are a community," he declared, his words breaking through the haze of intimidation. "And together, we are stronger than any shadow you cast over us." The clinking of glasses and murmurs of agreement rose up, swelling like a wave rolling back toward James and the officers. That scream of defiance sparked a flicker of courage in others. One after another, voices echoed, murmurs stitched together into a tapestry of unity. "Join us." Ava shouted above the growing ambience, lifting her chin defiantly. "We will not be silenced." Amidst the chaotic surge, I sensed movement in the corner of my periphery. A young man, a newcomer to the diner, suddenly stepped forward, his expression resolute. He held out his phone for all to see, the screen illuminated with the flashing symbol of a live stream. "Everyone needs to see this," he said, energized. "Let the world know we are standing strong." gasps of surprise fluttered through the room, and for a brief moment, I felt that hope swell again. Would our courage reach beyond this diner? Would it resonate far enough to ignite a larger fire? But James remained unfazed, his eyes narrowing. Pathetic, he sneered, his voice crawling in rhythm with menace. You think this changes anything? You're just drawing more attention to your inevitable demise. He turned toward the nearest officer, his tone smoothly commanding. Surely, you can help put an end to this ridiculous charade, and like a knife cutting through butter, my heart plummeted. The balance we had fought so hard to create suddenly dangled in the hands of the police. What would they do? Would they rally behind us, or would they side with the sinister grip of control meant to suppress us? Before I could sustain the earnest breaths filling my lungs, one of the officers nodded at James, a gesture heavy with implications. We'll need to discuss the best course of action, he said, the tone of dismissiveness unmistakable. In that instant, fear ignited anew. It clenched at my gut, straining against the embers of defiance still flickering within. Uncertainty clouded my vision, tethering down the hope we had built collectively. It felt vulnerable, like a child at the edge of a precipice, taking cautious steps without an anchor, and just then, as the sirens wailed louder outside, another flicker caught my eye. The waitress, the very embodiment of resilience, stepped forward and glared defiantly at James, who had now regained his composure. You think this is about you? She asked bravely. This isn't just noise for the authorities to squash. This is our home. In that moment, her eyes sparkled with fire, and I witnessed the heartbeat of something greater than fear or anger. It was the embodiment of a collective spirit demanding to be heard. Yet, as I turned back to Ava, the air thickened with doubt again, an unshakable fear slithering through my thoughts. How long could we sustain this fight? What sacrifice would it take to confront the darkness? The question lingered heavily as the tension built, leaving us teetering dangerously on the brink of all we had conjured. And just when I thought the ground beneath our feet felt solid, a sudden crash echoed from the diner's entrance, drawing every gaze including mine as the door burst open once more. The figure that entered sent shockwaves through my core, leaving me breathless and unsettled. Could it be that help had finally arrived, or was this yet another layer of threat descending upon us? Hope battled with fear in that instant, sending my heart into a frenzied race as I stood frozen, eyes wide, bearing witness to the unknown that stepped into the storm. As the diner door swung open, a symphony of gasps erupted, reverberating like echoes of memory caught between fleeting moments of hope and despair. The figure who stepped in appeared at once both familiar and disconcerting. It was Mia, the quiet passenger I had noticed at the counter earlier that day. Her presence pierced through the chaotic atmosphere, filling the air with a tremor of anticipation. Mia, with her wild halo of curls bouncing defiantly around her shoulders, had always carried an air of untamed resilience. But today, the determination etched across her features seemed sharper, electric. She was not just a bystander in our unfolding drama, she was a force demanding recognition. I dared to hope she had come to help. What the hell is going on here? She demanded, pushing past the threshold, her voice unwavering. Her gaze swept across the gathered crowd, and for a brief moment, it felt as though her fierce spirit had woven a protective barrier around us. James' smug expression faltered at her arrival, irritation seeping into his veneer of confidence. This doesn't concern you, he sneered. Step aside, or things might get messy. She replied, her voice resonating with quiet authority. You've turned this place into your own twisted playground, and we've had enough. I felt a rush of warmth at her bravery, a flicker of encouragement spreading through the crowd, melting the ice of fear that had been hardening in my chest. I could see the elderly man from earlier straightening his back, emboldened by her unwavering conviction. Even Ava's grip on my hand tightened, a shared sense of purpose igniting between us. James stepped forward, anger bubbling beneath his calm facade. This is not a stage for theatrics. You're all playing a dangerous game. Mia squared her shoulders, her demeanor radiating strength. Dangerous? Living under your shadow has been the real threat. You don't just intimidate us, you seek to erase us. But we won't let that happen. We are people, not your puppets. Encouraged by her words, the murmurs of agreement grew louder among the patrons, crescendoing into a rallying cry that filled the diner with an undeniable energy. The waitress, her eyes glistening with tears of resolve, shouted, "She's right. We're not going to settle for your version of reality any longer," but there was still a chilling undercurrent rippling through the air, laden with uncertainty and dread. Beneath the surface of our unity, the looming presence of the armed officers floated like a dark cloud, ready to shatter the fragile bonds we had woven. I glanced towards them, searching their faces for any sign of solidarity or compassion. One officer seemed to hesitate, his brow furrowing slightly as he watched the scene unfold before him. I dared to hope for a moment that he might notice our struggle, that perhaps some faint glimmer of humanity remained within the very institution meant to protect us. However, the flicker of hope was quickly snuffed out when James stepped closer to the officer, his voice low and conciliatory yet filled with an undertone of manipulation. "You must understand, this is just a misunderstanding. I was merely offering a unique opportunity." His words dripped with condescension, but Mia wouldn't let him recapture the narrative. "You're a tyrant, not a benefactor. Your opportunity reeks of exploitation." Her hands curled into fists, trembling with the weight of our shared fight. "We will not let you sidestep responsibility for your actions." "Not anymore," the crowd surged behind her, a wall of collective courage pushing back against the tide of oppression. Every face around me seemed alive with a newfound determination born from countless small rebellions, moments ignited by the resilience embedded within all of us. But just as unity felt like it would bring us together, a sudden shout sliced through the air, igniting a palpable panic that rippled like wildfire. "Look out!" someone cried, pointing outside. My heart raced, every instinct screaming in alarm as I turned toward the increasingly frantic voices. The officers, now seemingly alerted to the brewing storm of emotion, were beginning to move, their stances strong and foreboding. I could see them adjusting their grips on their weapons, a silent threat hanging heavily in the air. "Get back!" one shouted, stepping forward, his eyes trained on the crowd. "Order this chaos, now." A wave of fear washed over me, stifling the courage we had built so carefully, as uncertainty reared its head once more. Would our peaceful stand result in violence? The thought wrapped its fingers around my throat, choking out the confidence we had fought to maintain, but before I could retreat into despair, remembered Mia standing there, steadfast amid the upheaval. Her unyielding presence fueled the smoldering embers of hope, highlighting the stark truth: regardless of the outcome, we were not defined by their fear, we were united by our resilience. The tension snapped like a taut wire, vibrating with the energy of unresolved conflict clashing against newfound determination. Just as I finally found the strength to take a step forward alongside Mia, a loud bang echoed through the diner, a gunshot, abrupt and shattering, ringing through the air like a death knell. In that moment, everything froze. Time stood still, twisted within the surreal horror of what we had come to fight against. We had wanted to challenge tyranny, to reclaim our voices, but now the stakes soared higher than we had imagined. As the echoes of that dreadful sound lingered, the weight of uncertainty crashed upon us. Was hope now laid to rest amidst the chaos? What would happen next? The truth lay suspended in a tense silence, pregnant with impending dread and the fragile essence of courage fighting for survival. The din of shock reverberated around the diner like a shockwave, pulsating through the very core of our collective hearts. I could feel the tension crystallizing in the air, threading through our bodies and minds. What we had thought was an impromptu rally for justice had spiraled into a moment of visceral fear, instilled by a single gunshot. Instinctively, I clutched Ava's hand tighter, feeling the sudden clamminess of her palm as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Mia remained rooted at the forefront of our improvised Justice League, her expression morphing from fierce defiance to one of fierce determination in the blink of an eye. The sound of the gunshot still lingered, but she seemed impervious to the panic that was unspooling in every corner of the diner. "Everyone, stay calm," she shouted, her voice slicing through the thick fog of uncertainty, a beacon amidst the dread. "We won't let fear dictate our lives anymore." I caught sight of the officer who had seemed hesitant moments before. He was now frozen in shock, weapon still drawn but wavering. It was an infinitesimal crack in the armor of bureaucracy, a flicker of doubt amidst the looming shadow of authority that felt almost sacred. Levels of anxiety surged within the diner, hearts racing behind a thin veil of stale coffee and greasy plates. I could feel the weight of hundreds of breathless hushed whispers filling the space, echoing Mia's resolve but laced with trepidation. Time wobbled under the pressure of that gunshot, each heartbeat a sonorous reminder of our vulnerability, yet, ignited within me was an indignant fire, unruly and wild, kindled by the uncertainty. Is anyone hurt? The waitress's voice rose above the cacophony, her eyes wide, searching the crowd for any sign of injury, her concern genuine despite the precarious situation. It struck me how even in fear, kindness could rise to the surface. Mia took a cautious step forward, closing the gap between herself and the officer, the tension palpable as she became the tapestry of courage woven from so many disparate threads. "You don't have to follow his orders," she implored, her voice steady and strong. "You have a choice, just like we do. Let your humanity show, stand down. Everyone, get down." Came another authoritative shout, breaking through our moment of connection. Fear reasserted itself in the faces around me as several patrons hit the floor, some instinctively crawling under tables, others frozen in place paralyzed by indecision. A woman's child began to cry in fear, a small reminder that amidst the conflict, innocence still lingered. "Please don't shoot." The elderly man shouted, his voice shaky but full of desperation. "We aren't your enemy," Jameis' laughter echoed darkly, jarring in its casualness. "This is what happens when you poke the bear," he said, hovering somewhere in the periphery, a smirk twisting his lips. It ignited a response, a wave of resentment rippling through the crowd, but in that moment of chaos, as we grappled futilely with the unpredictable nature of fear and power, I saw humanity flicker brightly. The waitress slid behind the counter, returning swiftly with a tray of coffee mugs. They felt almost like shields, small tokens of normalcy against the violent tides crashing against us. "Anyone who needs it hot coffee. Stay alert," she offered, her gaze daring to meet mine briefly, a silent acknowledgement of unyielding solidarity. Mia's eyes darted between the officer and the crowd, surveying for a moment, planting herself as a steadfast rock in the river of uncertainty. "We're here to reclaim what's rightfully ours," she pushed on, her voice ringing with fervor. "You have the power to let us go peacefully. Show us you're human. Show us you care." It didn't escape my notice how some in the crowd were reluctantly rising to her invitation. The elderly man, shaking but resolute, stood beside Mia, raising his hands as if to symbolize hope itself. A few faces around me began to nod, their fear giving way to a burgeoning belief that perhaps, we could reshape this narrative that fear had been a daily accomplice for too long. Then, the officer who had hesitated earlier stepped forward, brow furrowed, as though he were wrestling with a tempest within. "This isn't a game," he warned, but his voice held a tremor, uncertainty bleeding into his authority as he directed his attention to James, who now wore an expression of mounting irritation. "Are you going to listen to them?" James hissed, his bravado faltering. "These people are nothing, we are people. Voices that deserve to be heard." Mia cried out defiantly, a warrior's heart igniting a wellspring of strength around her. The standoff became more volatile by the second, hearts pounding with urgency as hope and fear wrestled for control over the diner's fate. I met Ava's eyes, witnessing her fierce determination mirrored in my heart, a connection that spoke louder than words. Suddenly, as if the universe had conspired to chain our variables of dread into a storm of chaos, the officer aimed his weapon downward toward the floor. The action sent an impassioned wave of dread pulsing through the crowd, while something unexpected flashed in his eyes: resolve. But just as he began to open his mouth to speak, James lunged toward him, shattering whatever fragile truce had been forged amidst the chaos. The instant felt like an eternity, each heartbeat echoing louder as the precarious fabric of our fragile unity began to unravel. "Watch yourself," I yelled, fear clawing at my throat, my breath trapped in the descending spiral of despair. What would come next? Would courage still shine through in the aftermath of betrayal? Before I could process the scene unraveling before me, the echoes of the gunshot returned, ringing through our lives once again. The officer fired a shot, this time not aimed at the floor, and chaos erupted anew, bodies lunging in every direction, screams filling the air. As I stumbled back with Ava, time fractured again. I could barely register the freedom our struggle had seized, or the impending ruin unraveling before us. Hope felt thrilling, teetering on the thin edge of oblivion. Was it possible that before our eyes, the irrevocable could happen once more? Would we lose everything we had just begun to reclaim? A sobering realization gripped my heart, weighing heavier than ever as the din of chaos enveloped us, for no one knew how deep the scars of this battle would mar our souls. The air hung thick with tension as screams and shouts cascaded around us, each new sound chipping away at the resolve built in the moments before. I could barely process the chaos unfolding, everything consuming my thoughts, swirling into a vortex of uncertainty. Every heartbeat drummed a rhythm of panic, thumping through my veins the question that haunted us all: what would this new onslaught mean for us? Suddenly twisted in the fray, my vision slipped between the chaos and the void. Ava pulled at my arm, urging me to move, but my feet felt heavy, as if anchored by an unseen force. I could feel her fear radiating off her, an electric current of anxiety that seemed almost palpable. Other diners clamored, each seeking a safe corner to hide, fingers grappling blindly on tables and chairs, struggling to find clarity amidst the madness. There was Mia, still standing defiantly, a warrior amidst the storm, her figure unwavering despite the terror sweeping through our collective resolve. I admired her tenacity, but my heart ached with the knowledge that her bravery stood on the precipice of danger. It was a flame struggling to survive in a tempest of fear. Everyone, stick together. Mia called out again, her voice fighting against the tumult, rallying us to remain united. As people scattered, a few began to shift slowly toward her, their fear intertwining with the thread of hope she had spun, a small, flickering flame in the darkness threatening to engulf us all. As we shifted toward the back of the diner, I cast a furtive glance toward James, who had fallen to the ground, clutching a shoulder as the chaos swallowed him. A piece of me wanted to feel vindicated, to find satisfaction in his pain, but guilt swiftly bloomed in the pit of my stomach. I reminded myself that while he was undeniably monstrous, he was still a person, albeit one twisted by power and privilege. Ava's whisper pulled my focus back. What do we do? What if he aims for Mia next? Her eyes shimmered, the worry feasting on her courage, and my heart squeezed painfully in response. She reached for my hand again as if seeking assurance we would emerge alive, together. Just as the situation intensified, a voice cut through the cacophony, one so unexpected it momentarily silenced the clamor around us. You don't have to do this, officer. We just want to leave peacefully. A fierce yet gentle tone came from the waitress, her resilience unexpectedly grounding. She stood there, bearing witness to the madness, unyielding, her voice echoing with a mixture of compassion and strength. Mia is right. She turned her gaze toward the officer, her eyes striking with an empathetic warmth amidst the chaos. You have a choice. We are all people here, we deserve to be treated like people, not targets. The officer's expression flickered at her words, a glimmer of doubt breaking through the grim stoicism he wore like armor. For a beat, we all held our collective breath, hearts pounding in unison. In that moment, the struggle of authority against humanity hung in limbo, teetering between violence and compassion. Suddenly, a few patrons began to rise, emboldened by her call. She's right. We're just trying to live, shouted an older man, rallying behind the waitress. Those words sparked something between the din of chaos, threading through the fears like golden twine, softening the harsh edges of panic. But before this newfound camaraderie could take flight, a solid thud echoed as James clambered back up, fueled by rage more palpable than ever. Stop. Stop pretending you're something you're not. He roared, his voice booming with the weight of entitlement. You're less than the dirt on my shoe. Fear surged anew as he bore down upon the officer, desperate to re-establish control amid the chaos. My stomach twisted as I witnessed the officer's hand shake at the officer's words of domination. The moment felt expansive, burdened with a silence that spoke volumes, but then, like the resounding sound of thunder cracking in the distance, something shifted in the atmosphere. With unexpected ferocity, the waitress stepped in front of the officer, standing resolute. "You might be rich, James, but you don't get to decide who deserves to breathe free." I gasped, my eyes widening at her bravery. Ava squeezed my hand tighter, shock pulling at her features. This wasn't just a waitress, this was a warrior, rising unassumingly from the ashes underfoot. Her courage ignited something deep within me, a bold kinship with those around us, as if we could rewrite this narrative together. Yet, just as hope began to breathe, the moment crashed violently as James made a desperate lunge forward, a desperate gamble born from sheer ferocity. The officer reacted instinctively, aimed once more, and the crack of gunfire erupted through the room, terrifying yet oddly final. Everything slowed, the world blurring at the edges as if caught in a dream and a nightmare all at once. "No!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in the cacophony. Bodies fell into one another in a chaotic scuffle, deep screams muddled with shouts of the wounded, and I felt the ground beneath us shake with the impact of 100 hearts breaking in unison. When the dust settled, I could barely process what had happened. A shot fired, and my breath hitched painfully in my throat. Had anyone been hit? The chaotic dance of life, brimming with hope and trepidation, turned dark as shadows moved among the fallen. Somewhere within me, a stirring of clarity rose. We had wanted to reclaim our freedom, to ignite a flame powerful enough to chase away the darkness. But now, darkness loomed large, inching closer into our lives like a lion stalking its prey. I could hardly believe it, but there, within the thick mist of uncertainty, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the waitress once more, her hand clutched to her side, a shadow of something profound reflected in her eyes. The flicker of her spirit was alive, battling against the unforeseen tide. Would our voices be enough to drown out this new horror? Everything hung in a fragile balance, and as I clutched Ava's hand, a painful realization settled over me with a cold embrace. The true depth of our struggle was just beginning, and the choices made in the face of fear would ripple through our lives long after the sound of that gunshot faded. The diner was a shadow of its former self, a place once alive with the laughter and warmth of community, now marred by fear and anguish. The air was thick, stifling, saturated with a palpable dread. My heart raced as I stood with Ava, gripping her hand tightly, the reality of the moment hanging heavily over us like a shroud. The waitress, whose name I still didn't know, was slumped against the counter, her face a mask of pain that made my stomach twist. "Someone call for help!" Mia shouted, her voice cracking as she rushed to the waitress' side. The flickers of hope we once held were slipping through our fingers, each passing moment reminding us of the gravity of the chaos surrounding us. Ava's quiet sobs cut through the din, reminding me of our fragile humanity amidst the turmoil. I sought to comfort her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as I fought against the rising tide of despair. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, though my own heart was collapsing under the weight of uncertainty. But in that moment, a sliver of kindness emerged. An older woman in the back of the diner, witnessing the wreckage of our lives, stood. "I was a nurse, I can help," she called out, her voice steady and resolute in the face of chaos. She hurried forward, moving toward the waitress with purpose, as though she were a lighthouse guiding us through the stormy night. I felt gratitude swell within me, a warmth rising like sunlight on a chilling dawn. Together, the older woman and Mia knelt beside the waitress, their movements steeped in a solemn devotion that warmed the room with an ember of hope. I watched, breathless, as they worked in unison, their hands steady and sure. A commotion erupted as James shouted again, barking orders and searching for someone to unleash his fury upon. Anxious faces surrounded him, my heart clenched at the sight. For every act of defiance, he retaliated with scorn, his arrogance thickening the air until breathing became a challenge. "Shut up!" I shouted at him, surprising myself with my bravado. Within me flared something, ignited a primal urge to fight against the surreal reality he had thrust upon us. At that moment, James' gaze turned toward me, smoldering in contempt. "You think you can stand against me? You're nothing." Spitting out the words like venom, he stalked closer, intimidating in stature and presence. My heart raced, and for a brief moment, fear threatened to squeeze the breath from my lungs, but a tiny flicker leaped forth from the depths of my resolve. Like the waitress' courage, I reminded myself that this was not just about my fear. It was about all of us, standing together in defiance of tyranny and tyranny's face. Here, in the dim light of a diner transformed into a battleground, I had found that we were stronger as a collective than any one individual could dare to be on their own. As I opened my mouth to respond, the voice of the older woman filled the air again, cool and measured, a bastion against the rage. "Mr. Thompson, if I may be so bold, we are not your pawns to control. We will not be silenced. You point guns, and we point hearts. We refuse to be afraid." She stepped forward, as Mia continued to cradle the waitress' wound. The sight brought a surge of bravery coursing through me. The moment shifted, tension palpably receding for just the briefest instant, and for the first time, I believed we might have the upper hand against the howling screams of despair, but that moment was short-lived. As if summoned by some cursed wind, sirens blared from the distance, a harbinger of both deliverance and dread. Had the police come to rescue us, or would they serve to amplify the chaos that enveloped us? Before I could fully process the implications, the diner door flung open. A new figure loomed in the entrance, framed by flashing lights and the cacophony of chaos, a man in uniform, flanked by two officers, both glancing at us with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Get down." The newcomer barked, raising his weapon as chaos ignited once more within the diner. The previously courageous among us now raced to find covers, voices rising in a cacophony of terror. In that split second, my eyes darted around the room, searching for a haven among the swirling havoc. Ava and I held on to each other, desperate for solace. I could see Mia still beside the fallen waitress, unwilling to abandon her in this mayhem, a testament to human kindness even as the threat of violence loomed heavier than ever. But before I could move to join her, the apparition of one final truth materialized within the chaos. A fleeting gaze exchanged between James and the new officer shook me to my core. A sinister understanding passed through the air, twisting everything we thought we knew about loyalty, privilege, and the consequences of power. The air thickened with dread once more, and I could only stand powerless, caught in a web of interconnected fates. The fragility of our liberation was teetering on the edge, and with it hung the realization of an unsettling truth: no one was truly safe, not now, perhaps never. The sirens echoed louder, merging with the chaotic symphony of despair. With every heart pounding against the onslaught, it became all too clear today would decide more than our fates, it would seal our destinies forever. The sirens wailed as if the universe itself was mourning, a bitter sound that clawed at my soul. I stood frozen, witnessing the chaotic eruption of humanity's darker impulses unfold before my eyes. The new officer barked orders, adrenaline pumping through the room like poison, swirling around us, distorting friendships, alliances, and the fragile bonds we had begun to forge. "Everyone stay down." He shouted again, his eyes shifting like a hawk, searching for a target. I pulled Ava closer, shielding her with my body as James's contemptuous smirk twisted my insides. The fragility of our unity hung like a thread, thin and taut, threatening to snap at any moment. Amid the turmoil, I glimpsed Mia's determined silhouette, a warrior wrapped in hope as she continued to apply pressure to the waitress's wound, her face a mask of concentration. A small flicker of admiration ignited within me. She had made a promise to stand by her, refusing to waver no matter the consequence. It was a powerful image, one that resonated deep within my heart. "Ava, I'm going to help her," I uttered, trying to keep my voice steady, yet the tremor betrayed the fear coursing through my veins. Slowly, she nodded, eyes wide with terror, but I knew she understood the fight wasn't just for our lives, it was for dignity and the unwavering essence of who we were. As I crawled toward Mia, I dodged erratic kicks and the frantic movements of bodies caught in the storm. James was raising his own weapon, eyes filled with malicious intent. "Stop. You'll regret this," he roared, his voice filled with a kind of madness that chilled me to the bone. In a heartbeat, adrenaline propelled me forward, fueled by anger and desperation. "You don't get to decide who gets hurt," I shouted back, my voice rivaling the chaos. The truth sat like a brand on my tongue. I could not let fear choke my voice any longer. Mia looked up at me, eyes filled with gratitude and fierceness. "I need bandages. Hurry," she urged as she pressed fabric against the waitress' wound, her hands trembling yet unwavering. I spotted a first aid kit slumped against the counter, half open and beckoning me with promises of healing. "Stay with me," she called to the waitress, who seemed caught somewhere between consciousness and oblivion. I scooped up the kit, my fingers fumbling through it, and tore it open, my focus narrowing to the task at hand. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the diner as James hurled a chair against the wall, splintering wood flying like shrapnel. "You are nothing but weaklings. Look at what my presence has brought: betrayal, fear." His words cut through the air like knives, aiming to slice apart the remnants of our unity. In that split second, I felt something deep within me, an ember that was previously stifled igniting into a flame, fueled by Mia's determination and the older woman's courage. We were not weak, we were enduring, we were fierce, and united, we became an unbreakable force against his tyranny. "Shut up, James," I yelled back, my voice catching him off guard, a challenge igniting in the air between us. Each act of courage generated ripples, echoes of resistance and resilience sweeping through the diner. My eyes flicked over the crowd, catching glimpses of others finding their strength in defiance, hushed conversations among those once silent igniting a spark of rebellion. As the sirens grew louder, struggling to break through the sound of chaos, the weight of inevitability pressed down upon us, reminding me that salvation could just as easily come with more heartbreak. "We need to get the waitress out of here," I said urgently to Mia, but before she could respond, I heard a gunshot echo, sharp, deafening. Time slowed, and the collective gasp of air in the diner became a tangible entity. My heart sank as I watched the older woman crumble to the ground, a dark crimson spreading across the floor. "No!" I screamed, stumbling back, a feeling of hopelessness clawing at my throat. The kindness that had sparked in her brave heart had now extinguished, and for a moment, I feared we would all be consumed. But then, through the haze of disbelief and sorrow, I saw a glimmer of movement from the corner. A small child, huddled behind a table, clutching a teddy bear, face stricken with terror. In that moment, a river of rage surged through me, an undeniable call to fight back, not just for ourselves, but for the future of innocence. As I turned to rally those around me into action, shaking with a whirlwind of emotion, the door flung open once more. Shadows loomed, the brutal reality of the situation twisting deeper into nightmarish dimensions. Those who entered were not officers, but masked figures cloaked in darkness, their intentions displayed starkly in their grip of weapons. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and every heartbeat painted the undeniable truth: we were facing the end of our fragile rebellion. In the midst of this escalating storm, my heart clenched with a shattering realization: I had played into their hands, the violence feeding their hate, and our light was dimming fast. With the hushed whisper of chaos persisting around us, I felt the presence of despair coiling around my throat once more. I had thought the fight would ignite hope, but would it only fuel the fire of deepening devastation? And then, just as darkness threatened to wrap around us fully, I caught the eye of James, healing with a smirk, the cruel anticipation lingering in the depths of his gaze. The realization hit me like a thunderclap: this had all been a game to him. No one could prepare us for what twisted desperation lay ahead. As I stood with my back against the walls closing in, I could see the die of hope unraveling against the stark reality crashing down. One terrible moment away from destruction, the truth surged in a haunting whisper within my chest: every choice made now would either save or shatter everything we held dear. The chaos of the diner had finally reached its peak, belief hanging by a thread as we all fought for our lives, grappling between the shadows of a dominating malevolence and the flickering candle of hope. The masked figures had entered like storms crashing through the fragile dam of our resolve, and I felt my heart sink at the question resonating in the air: how far would this go? Ava clung tightly to my side, her breath quickening as she looked around frantically, searching for any sign of salvation amidst the cacophony of chaos. A part of me wanted to shield her from it all, to drag her out into the safety of a world that felt so distant now. But another, deeper part of me kindled with the realization that we were not just fighting for ourselves, we were fighting for every voice that had ever been diminished, every whisper that had gone unheard. The waitress who had fallen beside Mia became both a symbol of the vulnerability we shared and a reminder of the power we wielded collectively. Mia continued to press against the waitress' wound, her brow furrowed with intensity as she anchored herself in the eye of the storm. The older woman's breathing was shallow, but there was an indomitable spirit shining through even as darkness threatened to swallow us whole. The sight ignited pent-up determination within me. "Everyone!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the noise like a beacon in the storm, forcing a moment of stillness among the frightened crowd. The masked figures paused, glancing toward me with incredulous sneers, momentarily distracted from their intimidation tactics. "We're more than this, more than what they want us to be. If we stand together, they cannot break us." The words shattered the veil of fear that loomed like a thick fog, and slowly, tentative head nods began to ripple through the crowd. I felt a weight lift, heartened by the potency of that shared understanding. Ava turned to look at me, fear mingling with a burgeoning hope. "Are you ready?" I whispered, and she nodded, steeling herself against the storm. In that shared moment, we found clarity, a bond of unity that cradled our fear while promising courage. As the masked figures began to advance again, the sirens outside blared louder, weaving a symphony of desperation and urgency. But just then, the waitress stirred, dazed yet filled with an innate power, as though she was recalling the truth we so desperately needed to believe. "You can't silence us," she gasped, her strength lifting our hearts as she valiantly struggled to rise, even as Mia pressed on, offering solace amid the gathering darkness. It was in that fleeting moment that I watched as something shifted within the authorities outside, an officer breaking from the line and peering through the diner's window, reflecting back a hesitant gaze. He hesitated before moving tentatively toward the entrance, uncertainty etched into his features as he glanced back at the officers still entrenched in musk and fire, clearly conflicted. I seized the opportunity. If he could awaken the sense of humanity concealed within the ranks of authority, maybe we could turn the tide. "Officer! Listen to her!" I shouted, pointing at the waitress, the embodiment of our defiance. "They're trying to destroy everything we've built. You can stop this." The officer's expression shifted, a tremor flickered across his face at the sight of our unity, and slowly he turned towards his fellow officers, trying to gauge their reaction as our voices intermingled with the urgent sirens outside. In an act of solidarity, the elderly man who had stood bravely earlier once more stepped forward, raising his hands. "We are not your enemies, don't be fooled by their games. We have a right to live." His voice cracked, but the strength behind it shook the air with a pulse of our shared defiance. Encouraged, the crowd surged behind him, stronger, resolute. "We will not be silenced." We repeated the chant, a chorus resonating within the walls that had long held our fears captive. James mimicked laughter, a dark sound that echoed off the diner walls, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty flash across his face. In that moment, I realized that we were all part of this fragile web, intertwining lives that could either be crushed or elevated. Hope was crime enough, and we had all chosen to rise. And then, with one final surge of adrenaline, the officer who had hesitated stepped fully into the diner, his eyes darting around the room before he aimed his weapon downward. "Everyone, drop your weapons and let's talk," he commanded, and just behind him, I could see that the tide was shifting. His presence unfolded an opportunity. He was becoming a bridge between us and hope. Jameis' mouth fell open as silence seized him, as though he could almost taste despair clinging in the air. It was a battle of egos and ideals, but we were undeniably becoming the storm. "Enough!" I shouted, the final burst of energy spilling from my lips like sunlight breaking the horizon. "We are not your pawns. This isn't just about you. Together, we are stronger." A shared united roar arose from the crowd around me, amplifying the urgency of the moment. Would James and his tyranny be enough to snuff out the burgeoning flames of rebellion? The officers stood alongside the masked figures, straddling the line of authority and the people they were supposed to protect. And when James stepped toward the officer, his mouth twitching with fury, I felt the air crackle between us, every heartbeat brimming with the weight of defiance, ready to burst like a triggered landmine. Just as it seemed everything would fall into renewed chaos, the unexpected happened. The officer turned his gaze fully in Jameis' direction, standing tall and unyielding. "You don't own this situation anymore. We are done with the fear," he declared, yanking his badge free from his uniform as if stripping away the burden of tyranny that had weighed upon our hearts. That stance galvanized the air, a wave of courage crashing over us as the fracture in the narrative widened. Hope swelled throughout the diner, a dangerous beauty curling amongst the embrace of an uproarious harmony, fueled by the promise of transformation. Ava gripped my hand tighter, her eyes aflame with belief. "We can do this," she breathed, and I nodded, heart racing, as we prepared to charge forward into a brighter dawn. That final unfurling of courage became the silent rebirth of our disheartened spirits. We were all rising from the ashes of despair, ready to reclaim our stories woven against a backdrop of darkness. And in that crescendo of chaos, a single voice broke through, definitively declaring the truth we so desperately needed to hear: we choose love over fear. It surged forth from the waitress, lifted by Mia beside her, ringing like the sacred sound of a bell tolling through stilled air, wrapping around us like a vibrant banner unfurling the light we feared extinguished, now igniting the spirit of rebellion within. And the unbreakable unity. I finally understood. It wasn't just our lives that hung in fragile balance, it was the resolve to shatter the chains of oppression, the shimmering promise that we could emerge stronger, unyielding as a forest, renewing itself after a brutal storm. As I surveyed the room one last time, I locked eyes with Ava, and without hesitation, I uttered words steeped in conviction. Together, we can reclaim our humanity. That thread of truth reverberated like the infinite pulse of life through us all. And with the dawn of a new understanding, we surged forward not as conquered souls drowned by power, but as champions ready to face whatever darkness awaited us with open hearts. Together, we could weave the tapestry of hope anew, shining brightest when challenged, unafraid to rewrite our stories on the canvas of a shared tomorrow. In that pivotal moment, I knew, we would not just survive, we would thrive, for courage sparked in unity, and love, oh love, would remain our greatest rebellion against the storm. And through the chaos that had threatened to engulf us, I stood firm by Ava's side, ready to reclaim what was ours, remembering that light and darkness danced together, but it was through our choices that one would always triumph over the other. We would rise, weaving paths back to each other, returning to our truest selves through the power of resilience and the irrefutable strength of community. The fire ignited in every heart would not be extinguished until it remained victorious. And as I glanced around one final time, the crushed remnants of our fear, united in the exhilarating truth, resounded within me. This was just the beginning, and we would never stop fighting for the love that defined us, even against the stormiest of nights.